Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for this webinar today. My name is Ammara Naeem. I'm the Director of Client Experience at Top Employers Institute, and I'm joined today by my amazing colleague, Jake. I'm going to hand it over to you so you can do your own intro.
Thank you, amazing colleague Ammara. My name is Jake Canull. I head up the Americas for Top Employers. I have the pleasure of serving on our growth leadership team alongside Ammara. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York, and I look over Top Employers Institute and participants across the Americas. So that's from Canada to LATAM down to Brazil. We've got teams all over in Brazil, Mexico City, and in the US. So looking forward to being with you all. For those of you who don't know Top Employers Institute, we exist to really help organizations do two things. One is benchmark their people practices against 2,500 other top employers globally to link those practices to business outcomes that matter. And two is if they're doing enough of those practices consistently, they link it to their employer brand to show up as not just saying they're a top employer, but actually credibly being one through the audit our amazing team does. So that's a bit about me and a bit about Top Employers. But Ammara, back over to you. I'll be kind of armchairing this one from America's perspective.
We're actually really lucky to have Jake on this call today because he'll be able to bring in really the America's local flavor to this conversation and make it much more relevant to the audience that it's targeted at today. So please do not hesitate to comment or put your questions in the chat throughout. We'll be trying to keep an eye on it, and let's make this a little bit more interactive than my monologue or just our conversation. It's much more fun. And one thing's for sure, this isn't really intended to be a summary of our trends report because, trust me, you'll get the QR code towards the end or the link to download the report. You can do that in your own time. You can read all the details that there are. We'd like for this to be a little bit more of like a working session where we have these conversations and hopefully you take away something that you can actually start doing next week. That's our intention. There are a lot of ways you can come at it, but we would like to talk about things that you can start doing as an HR professional, not next year, not next quarter, next week kind of situation. So before we start and dive into the content, a real quick question for everybody. How many of you feel that your organizations are busier than ever before, yet not necessarily as effective? I mean, it's more like a reflection question as well, but if you do have comments, feel free to put them in. But I ask this question a lot of the times when we're having our people summits or connect sessions, and almost everybody's hand kind of goes up. And the reality is the data is also backing this up. If you look at the Microsoft's Work Trend Index report, it's saying that the work day has actually increased by 2.5 hours since 2020. That's quite significant. And then at the same time, what we're seeing is that 8 out of 10 employees are actually saying that they don't necessarily have the resources or energy to give more to work. So there's like this weird situation that's happening. So all organizations are kind of saying we need more work done. So work is expanding, expectations are increasing, but effectiveness isn't necessarily following. So here's what's happening beneath the surface, right? When organizations come under pressure, there's something very common that happens. They begin to accelerate, right? Let's speed things up or add more stuff, like more programs, more initiatives, more priorities and whatnot. But our research shows that organizations that are actually sustaining performance over time aren't necessarily the ones doing a lot more or are doing things faster than ever before, faster than anybody else in the world, but they're the ones who are making deliberate choices about how work is designed and where leadership attention really goes. So it's about creating that focus. And this is exactly what we are calling an intentional organization. And it comes down to 3 shifts that are happening, right? These are the organizations that give preference to coherence over acceleration. They look at value over volume, and they look at clarity over complexity. And it comes down to these three shifts, and these are the ones that are like aligning all this into a deliberate system that shows up in their purpose within the technological systems, within the flexibility, productivity, and all everything else that goes around in work, how work is actually designed. So today, what we'll do is we'll walk you through five intentional choices that these organizations are making based on our research. And this is how we think that the best organizations will be working in 2026. And hopefully, we'll be able to give you something concrete to take away from each one. So, Jake, let's get into it, and feel free to chime in whenever.
Yeah, sounds good.
Your perspective as we go.
And team, I did drop a little note. Kathy responded to me. Let us know where you're calling in from in the chat. We want this to be interactive. Let's see, we got North Carolina and New York on the line. We also, Ammara mentioned earlier, but for those that just joined, we like tough questions. So throw those in the Q&A throughout, and we'll try to tackle them along the way. We'll also have a couple of fun polls for you. So this should be interactive. Oh, Netherlands, nice, makes sense. Yeah. All right, cool. Back to you, Ammara.
All right, great. Well, I can. Hi, Nanette. Also in the Netherlands.
Jersey. Yeah, Minneapolis. We got Texas, Houston, Mexico. Awesome.
Perfect. I love it. All right, so let's start with why do we exist, right? Like the basic element of everything. So purpose is one of those things that I think that has been so used and abused, I'd say, that it's almost lost its meaning. So every organization has a purpose statement, right? I can't think of an organization that hasn't had a purpose statement at some point in time, but usually it's something that's sitting on a wall somewhere or on like a booklet in your drawer, whatever, etc., etc. But here's what's actually changing. The organizations that are performing the strongest in our research aren't really the ones who have the best written purpose statements, but they are the ones who are actually using purpose as a filter for decision making. And that distinction really matters, especially for HR professionals, because it kind of changes your job. It's not your job to maybe design the purpose statement, but it is your job to make sure that the systems are designed in such a way that they reflect that purpose. And what we are also seeing is, if you look at our top employers, 96% of them say their strategy aligns with their purpose and value. It's a huge number. Right? It's almost the whole entire data set that we have of 2,500 organizations. And 72% of those organizations are proactively creating structured opportunities for employees to connect their work to the organizational purpose. And 55% are actively monitoring purpose alignment through scorecards, not just surveys. And purpose scorecard is like quite an advanced practice where you literally go and look at every element of your purpose in relation to your business, and you kind of see how you're scoring against each of those elements. So not something that everybody is really pitching in for, but still a little bit more than half the population of top employers is looking at this. But within all of this, what's really changing, what's driving all of that is another interesting element that we found through our research, right? And it's leadership and the expectations around it. Developing current and future leaders has become the most important number one priority for top employers across the globe, regardless of where they're sitting, right? And we're also seeing that really reflected in the numbers. If you look at 1 year ago to, let's say towards the end of last year, we are seeing that when we look at the integration of leadership development from definition to like real integration end to end, it's gone up by 9 percentage points in 1 year. That says a lot, because I think there is that realization that purpose doesn't live in documents anymore. It lives in what leaders do every Tuesday morning. How you show up to your meetings. You are the first, as leaders, you're the first layer of what your employees are going to feel and follow. You're the role model, as cliched as it may sound. That is the reality of it. And I think, Jake, you and I have spoken quite a lot about this. It's that translating layer of the system that matters the most.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's I think from America's take, thinking of this kind of section of the world, um, there's no question on whether we've got our purposes mapped out, right? Like our company purpose, why we exist, the customers we're serving across the different regions, and the values that we have that go along with that. But many of you, like me, probably have noticed in the last probably 18 months in particular, with the maybe longer work days we're feeling, the acceleration of AI over the last 3 years, which we'll get into in a second here, a lot of individuals aren't really looking to say, hey, what's this company's purpose and can I align with it, right? That's kind of table stakes at this point. I think what more organizations we're seeing across the Americas do is actually be able to live up to the standards they're talking about.
Exactly.
So what do we mean by that? Like, let's take onboarding for an example. I'm teaching this course with 20 HR execs across North America at the moment. And it's a course that teaches them to build their own AI agents, right? So one of the things we're looking at is like an AI onboarding agent to support that process. But instead of just embedding purpose or writing a purpose statement or a value statement with AI, it's actually saying, how can we best audit our processes to match what we say we do with the actual employee experience? Exactly. That is kind of the next level of experiencing the purpose of an organization. That's why a lot of top employers work with us on the audit side too, right? They get that visual view. But that's kind of my take on the American side of Ammara.
That's a really cool example that you're sharing, because SAP had done something, not necessarily AI based, but they did move towards like AI and cloud first business, right? And one of the interesting things that happened was they very quickly realized that all of this is not going to be just purpose statements kind of thing, that we really need to live it through our leadership. And one of the things that what you're referring to as well, these leaders are the ones working on all this stuff because they're supposed to be role modeling it. They also took their leaders and they said, you are going to be the thought leaders, not only internally, but also externally. We're going to go out with like, we are the AI first organization, and you are going to be speaking to all of what relevance is this day and age, not only for your employees but also externally. And this was done also through this whole program had a little bit broader context here. They called it Elixir, and what I also love about it is that they built it in-house almost entirely with employee input and feedback. So really like SAP kind of situation. And Elixir was, it stood for engaging leadership in expertise, resilience, impact, and resilience. And so the three pillars basically were, hey, leaders need to lead with credibility. So they were focused on reinforcing all of that AI fluency, like working with AI and all that stuff, to make sure that what their teams were going through, they were also capable of managing, handling, and being able to speak to it. So it's this other credibility factor, right? And the second one was, being, the thought leader. It's about the impact internally and externally. And the third bit was helping these leaders go through transformation and take their teams along with them with empathy, not just speed. And they had some remarkable results from this. Like 92% of participants completed. I mean, that's a bit like a hygiene factor number for me. But what was impressive was 78% of the participants moved into new roles after going through this program. So that says a lot. In my opinion. And the best thing was they had this challenge with attrition in the people leadership layer, and that completely stabilized. So purpose basically turned into a leadership system for SAP through this program, which was pretty cool. Anything in the chat that we should be? Oh, I see. Hello, everyone. I see from all parts of the world, eh?
Yeah, exactly. You threw in the Canadian A there too. I like it. I think we're good. We just got places where people are. So I'll keep an eye on the chat. If you have questions or thoughts, team, as they're coming in, we'll call them out. But I think we can keep rolling.
So let's go with some key takeaways here. I think one, Jake already started to use the example of, and it's like I said, we're going to keep it super, 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 super simple. And so the first one could be something like audit your onboarding program for purpose. Is it actually connecting your new hires to the why the organization exists, or just whatever their role entails? Add one deliberate purpose conversation in week one. It takes almost no budget and sends an immediate signal to the new hire as to how important purpose is to the organization. Another thing you can look at is pick one existing process, any, whether it's your promotion criteria, whether it's your performance framework or your manager toolkit, and ask yourself, does this really reflect our stated values? If not, add one question or one criteria that actually does. Start small, nothing complicated. And another thing to look at is you don't really need to jump ahead to purpose scorecard. Like I mentioned, that's quite an advanced practice to do. So add two questions to your next pulse survey. Like, do you understand how your work connects to our purpose? And do your manager's decisions reflect our values? And that data will give you such enriched information, obviously, because here's another sort of like reflection moment, right? That kind of speaks to the last bit I was talking about. Think of a major people decision made in the last quarter at your organization. Was purpose even part of the discussion? Because I'm coming with like it should be used as a decision filter. So whatever decision is made, how is it made? How does it look like in your organization? Would love to hear some comments in the chat, but if not, just self-reflection. That's all we're after as well here.
Yeah, Ammara, I'll just chime in here because it's, I was speaking at the Toronto People Analytics Summit back in February to a group of about 100, maybe 120 people analytics leaders representing organizations across the Americas. And one of the things that we were talking about was this kind of this intention, and also it's related to purpose, but it's also related to what's the outcome you're trying to drive, right? And you have to be willing to make trade-offs. And so intentional organizations at times make intentional trade-offs. So we look at, many of you know, like we look at 200 plus actual HR people practices that are consistently done or not. And, you know, there are some of those practices that are more strongly linked to, I mean, correlational links, right? They're linked to things like revenue or profitability growth because higher performers are doing them more often, right? But there are other things that are more strongly linked to employee engagement and retention. Yeah. And sometimes those practices might be moving away from one another, right? You might do one because you're focused on revenue growth at the moment, but you know it's probably not going to be the best for retention, right? Yeah, that might be an intentional trade-off you make. Yeah. Yeah. And so I guess the other piece here is for folks on the call is to think about what are the practices that maybe link or align to like the golden ones, like are all the outcomes, which is just absolutely great.
All like about context and what's relevant in the moment as well.
Yes, but then you have to make those choices to say, what are the ones we're deciding not to do now? We're going to press pause on and do them later because.
Yeah, but I mean, of course, revenue is always going to be an outcome everybody's after, no doubt. But it's also when it's like short-term versus long-term impact, what moves the needle for your purpose in that situation could also be something to keep in the back of your mind. Next up, I'm looking at the time and we're already quite a bit ahead. So let's move on. So once we've done all the purpose stuff, the question becomes, how do we scale intelligently, right? And obviously, we're not going to do that without AI in this day and age. So it's not just about slapping AI wherever, because that usually doesn't work. And almost every organization is experimenting with AI right now, but far fewer are actually redesigning work around it. And that gap between the two things is quite significant. We're also seeing that in the research from different points of view as well. For example, 46% of AI projects are scrapped between pilot and full deployment. That's roughly half, right? So organizations are experimenting, but many initiatives never make it into real operational use. Even when AI is implemented, only 34 to 37% teams report meaningful productivity gains. So despite all the excitement, organizations are still struggling to translate that adoption into real performance improvement. And perhaps the most telling, at least for me, is this one. 33% of executives say they lack confidence in AI results. Not because it isn't powerful, right? Because it is, we all know that, but because organizations, at least on the enterprise level, and Jake, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because when I'm speaking to our enterprise clients, it's what they're finding difficult is to figure out how to use it across board responsibly, effectively, and really how to scale it and move it up from individual levels.
Yeah, I can weigh in on this one. I think it's funny. So this is across the Americas, north, south, central. We're seeing, I've been polling folks across different cities along the way, and we're seeing only 15 to 20% max of organizations, HR teams at organizations, consider themselves leading on AI. Okay, 15 to 20%. Everyone else, the 80%, 80 to 85, many folks maybe on this call or otherwise, the majority of the rooms you're going to walk into, they're just starting to experiment, or they're actively saying they're behind on AI. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to lead the witness. We're doing a little poll in a second here, so just forget that out of your head. But but the insight from that, I think, Ammara, is there's no question of the impact of AI and how it can land across the Americas. The question comes back to what you just referenced: ethics, governance, and what is my IT willing to let me do? Like, what risks are they willing to let me take? Because so much of this is skill building for HR professionals. And so much of this comes back to, again, governance, IT, like sensitive levels of data and information. It's difficult to actually build the skills required to make an AI implementation successful if you're playing around in a sandbox all day. So I would say the two layers that I see in the Americas, one is start with the top employers results you have on what you're doing consistently or inconsistently. Usually AI projects break when you try to slap AI against something you do already really inconsistently and has poor data.
Something already broken.
Yeah, exactly. Like start with something where the data is pretty clear and you do it pretty well already, and just really get that turning. Then you can use AI to clean some of the data elsewhere. That's one piece. The next piece is then skill building. You've got to take the time. You've got to make the time to build your skills. Don't go out and put a $200,000 to $500,000 dependency on your AI skills on a firm that's outside of your organization that controls your success on that project. Build the skills yourselves as human capital leaders. Once you can build them yourselves and use it on your individual use case, you will viscerally feel the emotional impact of that. You'll be like crying tears of joy because you're like, oh my gosh, this process that took me 10 hours takes me like 5 seconds now, and 90% of the time it's pretty good. You're like happy about it. So once you feel that, then you can start considering and thinking about how do we deploy this in levers and layers across the organization in ways that make sense, in strong partnership with IT. So we're covering a lot of those same governance topics this week, actually, in the course that we're kicking up.
Looking forward to hearing all about it. But I'm gonna actually quote you, something you said, and that really stuck with me was the difference between or like kind of keeping in your mind AI ambition versus AI discipline. And it kind of boils down to that, right? Like, yeah, we have this ambition, but unless and until you have that discipline, individual level and organizational level, it's difficult to get to those productivity gains that everybody is craving at this point.
Yeah, it's good. That's thanks for quoting me. I trademarked that one, Ammara. No, I think the other thing, I mean, if you look at it, AI is what in the current state, like this really launched like 3 years ago. I mean, that's like a toddler, as far as age goes, but we're trying to act as if it has the maturity already of well-defined adult, which, give or take, AI is moving fast. So we need to be careful with that, but we do need to train ourselves in those same skills because we're in infancy stages on those skills at this point. It's more people are talking about using it than actually building and using with it. So it's important to start there.
Yeah, true that. And another of course, like the value behind what we're discussing here is AI with intent, right? That's why we named that trend. So you need to know where you're going with this. And one example that we saw among our globally certified top employers is coming from JTI. So their starting question wasn't really how do we automate recruitment? It was how do we use AI to improve speed and accuracy while preserving fairness, trust, and human judgment? That's fundamentally a different starting point, right? So they introduced two tools, Mark and Zoe. That's what they named them. So Mark supports candidate shortlisting, and Zoe handles scheduling and queries. If you hear a toddler in the background, I have a 3-year-old and he throws tantrums too. Uh, just say.
Same age as AI.
So I could relate to the example you were sharing. So Mark and Zoe. So basically, what they ended up doing was these two tools were developed not just by HR or by their IT teams. It was a collaboration. It was this cross-functional thing, which also I think is super important when you start looking at AI with intent. It's not like a one-function thing. It needs to be where everybody's kind of coming together. So anyway, when they implemented these two tools, what ended up happening was the shortlisting time, all thanks to Mark, dropped from 50 minutes to 7 minutes, and scheduling time more than halved. But the most important change wasn't necessarily the time saved. It was what the recruiters could actually do with that time. Deeper conversations with the candidates, more, digging into their potential, more meaningful feedback, talking to the hiring managers. So human judgment stayed central in this situation as well. And the system focuses on role fit, not, demographic data. And final decisions always involved a person. And that's what AI with intent looks like in practice. There was a goal. They wanted to sort of go in a certain direction. There was an ambition, but with discipline, and they ended up with it. There's I can't help but think about when IBM also came up with their skills first pivot in the US, right? And they moved away from the degree requirements and started using AI to match the skills, etc. That also kind of, with such a business impact, it was also something quite intentional that became bigger than just looking at how you're moving people within the organization.
Great example, Ammara, of a timeless people practice, right? This isn't new. 200 years ago in the Industrial Revolution, when we were facing what was considered then a skills erosion being, people who actually handmade stuff now moving to industrial machines, the Germans came up with the idea of apprenticeship, right? You earn to learn. And then that same people practice is the one that IBM in that example is applying even to this day. So just an example of like the timeless people practices that kind of stay consistent no matter what technology is impacting the day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, precisely. Well, let's do a quick pulse check here. We are a little bit of like our first poll questions. Would love to see where everybody is at this point in time. So where
you should see the poll.
Yeah, I can see it on my screen, so I'm assuming everybody else can as well.
Yeah, so we got 5 responses so far. Let's get a few more in there. Yeah. Where would you say your organization is today in terms of AI adoption? Experimenting with individual tools, running team pilots, scaling across functions with some governance, AI genuinely integrated into how work is designed. All right, looks like the responses are flowing, Ammara. So we've got at 55% experimenting, 28% running pilots, 17% scaling with some governance. That's good to see. 5% genuinely ahead. Okay, we'll have to get that person's detail.
Yeah, I know, right? We need to talk to you guys.
Yeah. They'll have to be speaking on this webinar. Nice. Excellent response.
But I know you've used this poll at different occasions in the Americas, Jake. What has your observation been? Do you see anything different or?
Yeah, actually, it's kind of funny. More folks are answering C and D. It looks like the combination of C and D is just up over 22, 23%. And that's actually rising, even from when I've asked the question, probably within the last 3 to 6 months. So, it's cool to see how quickly that's rising amongst audiences. And I imagine that will accelerate. We'll see probably, I think we're in Q2 now. So I think by Q3, Q4, that probably stat will be closer to 35%. And my estimation is about half of organizations by this time next year will be fully kind of scaling across functions. It just takes some time.
It's kind of nice to sort of like watch it move in real time.
And look, the Americas, I think Americas, I'm proud of you all because in a lot of ways we're leading this effort, right? So I kind of expect this cohort across the Americas to continue to be adopting probably a little bit faster, a little bit quicker than others, but with intention.
Absolutely. Well, for everybody that's on the call and you're wondering what can you do as an HR professional like next week, again, with that logic, one thing that you can start doing is map where AI already touches your HR processes, right? So whether it's hiring, scheduling, performance, learning recommendations, just create a simple inventory. Why I'm saying that is because it's like a very rudimentary starting point to come up with a governance structure, because you can't really govern something that you haven't named. So you do need that inventory of where AI actually is at the moment. Like we mentioned as well, enterprise-wide, it's not as easy to just kind of make it go across the same way among different teams, etc. So this is where you start in HR. Where is it already there? Another thing you can do is, without you start talking about governance committees and stuff and the frameworks, just build a fairness checkpoint for any AI-assisted HR process that you have in place. Just pick one, again, to experiment, to learn from. Create a one-page checklist. Answer questions like, what does this tool decide? Who reviews the output? How is bias tested? And so start there, like very small, very tangible, before escalating it into enterprise governance. And another very sort of underestimated thing is equipping line managers, not just HR. Your managers are already using AI in different ways, in their daily work. So building that 30-minute literacy module would lead you to enabling them a little bit more as to what AI can and can't do, and when should they be overriding it. Because that's sort of like with great power comes great responsibility kind of situation. And it's kind of our responsibility to make sure that that's taken care of. Jake, anything to add before I move on to the next one?
Just a quick little note. I know we got to keep moving, but just that one of the agents that everyone built in this course we're doing with the 20 HR execs last week was the AI governance agent. So it was the idea of, if you don't have one already, based in an ethical AI framework. So we have a piece on that if you haven't built yours yet. But I think it was 40 to 50% of top employers have an ethical AI framework in place that then guides their AI governance structure. We had everyone build it last week, and the idea is, hey, having an agent to run all your other agents through and keep them in check on like your governance framework, right? So it's also, there are layers to this, but kind of an eye-opening piece there. So more to come.
It sounds very interesting. I think we need to do another one to sort of de-layer everything that the group, the cohort is building, right?
Yeah, might just have the cohort come teach the next webinar, huh? That'd be good.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, let's now get into freedom without chaos. And this is an interesting one, right? Before I get into it, I just want people to sort of self-reflect and think about, does flexibility feel empowering to you or exhausting? Because the difference almost always comes down to design, especially if you're leading a team or you're a manager. Not knowing what flexibility means within an organization, that lack of clarity almost always makes it more exhausting than empowering. So I want you to think about it. How are you experiencing this within your organizations? And the reality is that many organizations have reached a plateau when it comes to flexibility, right? The policies exist, hybrid models are in place, adoption is high. What's less developed is how flexibility actually works in practice, in real life, especially when you're under pressure across different teams, across different managers. And the data is kind of clear about what separates these organizations that get it right. And let me share those numbers with you. What we have seen is those with lower voluntary turnover are 13% more likely to have equipped leaders with hybrid management skills, and 9% to have optimized the employee experience for remote work. What these numbers are also telling us is that there is, first of all, there is much more clarity in terms of expectations, and that's why it's being translated into those numbers as such. Flexibility strengthens performance when expectations are clear. When they aren't, the problem is that it actually creates quietly, but it does, it creates new problems, invisible over time. Think about unequal workloads, think about hybrid inequality, and the particular friction of not really knowing what's expected of you as an employee, as a manager. It's kind of going through all the layers of the organization. It's that lack of clarity that kind of defeats the purpose of why flexibility existed in the first place. We've got this example, which I found very interesting, and it comes from ABB. And it really sort of genuinely offers a human example of how to get this right. What they started doing was they surveyed their workforce, and they discovered that 1 in 3, so this is like roughly a third of their population, right? 1 in 3 of their employees was actually a caregiver or identified as a caregiver. And that's a huge group for them in their context. And that insight completely changed their response. So instead of introducing a rigid policy as to what this is our caregiving policy or whatever, they focused on equipping managers. So training, awareness sessions, access to external caregiving advisor. Managers were entrusted to respond case by case. They could adjust hours, they could create space for more authentic, honest conversations, offering temporary flexibility where it was needed. So they basically gave them a framework, some guardrails, and where the trade-offs could be made within that context without making it super rigid. Like if A, then you go to B to C to D, etc. We all know, we've all been there and probably go through it again. The outcome was just absolutely fabulous. The engagement sort of skyrocketed. There was greater openness within the organization, reduced stigma and stronger trust. Actually, the Dutch Ministry of Social Affairs, because this is an example from the Netherlands, I'm proudly sharing this, actually requested a site visit to figure out how they managed this and made it work. Not only that, so not only the group that was impacted by this, the other employees who were not actually caregivers were also much more engaged, because guess what? They were thinking like, hey, at some point I might be a caregiver, right? So the organization is taking care of that. So when and if I need it, I do have this flexibility available for me. So that's a different way of looking at it.
That's cool. Yeah, I was just thinking, because across the Americas too, folks, whether you're working for a large employer, small employer, medium-sized employer, we all really care about productivity, being productive for the job you hired us for. And so I think the point you just made there, Ammara, was in an example with ABB, is it's interesting because you get inside the head of the human beings you work alongside. And when you get inside as a human being yourself, you ask that question and think about all the calories folks spend, especially when you're dealing with that kind of situation where you're giving care for someone else in your family or a friend. You spend a lot of mental calories and a lot of time that is unproductive, quote unquote, at work, focusing on this thing. So if you're able to reduce that load for employees, you free up mental space to then focus on productivity. Like it actually creates
Absolutely.
a space to get more stuff done.
Yeah.
It also shows that the people practice that cares for people isn't separate from productivity, but actually is connected to it.
Absolutely. And I think the bottom line is that clarity. I know there's been a lot of return to office situation in different parts, including Americas. Of course, a lot of strong voices are coming from there, and that's okay, regardless of the geography or what it means. It's that clarity of expectations is what we're getting at. It's not necessarily, everybody should be remote working kind of situation. So what can you do tomorrow as an individual? Create a team charter template. Managers don't really know how to set hybrid norms. And I know I myself in the beginning, pandemic era days, I had struggled with, okay, how do what's actually the guardrail situation I can play around with for my team. Give them that tool to do so. A one-page template, like the team charter is basically defining when is the team going to be available. Like, hey, everybody should be available between these hours, or this is where we take our breaks. This is when we meet in person. This is how we communicate urgently. So making that boundary setting a standard manager responsibility is where you can really, really start. But where it really starts to move the needle is rewrite your flexibility policy to include the how. Because right now we see flexibility policies that just are a list of options, right? Very, very, very few explain expectations. So add a simple section, how flexibility works within your organization, that covers maybe response times, meeting norms. I think PepsiCo came up with this example where of this practice where if the meeting invite doesn't have an agenda, you're free to decline it. I mean, it's simple as that, right? Like those norms, if they can be defined, then everybody's clear on the expectations. Run a quarterly flexibility pulse check, asking the employees, like, is it working as intended? Are the expectations clear? Managers equipped to support you? Just a 2-minute thing, but a lot of actionable things can come out for HR from those discussions. Jake, you already started to talk about this, the link with productivity. I think it's kind of like you can't have one without the other kind of situation. And that's what our next trend also speaks to, is designing for productivity, right? And the reality is productivity in 2026 looks nothing like productivity conversations we've been having for the last decade. So just want to quickly, because I think there's value here, I want to throw another poll at the audience and see what kind of responses we get. And it has to do with, when it comes to productivity, where is most of your organization's focus right now?
Okay, team, this is going to require some participation again. Close the tabs, rally back in. So A is encouraging people to work harder and manage their time better. Reducing low value meetings and administrative work is B. C is redesigning which work gets done by whom. And D is actively mapping skills to redeploy talent where it creates the most value. The question, when it comes to productivity, where is most of your organization's focus right now? Well, folks are responding to this too, so we have a few responses in. I think the other kind of element that we pulled out of our AI-powered leadership report last fall, Ammara, was the stat around many organizations are looking at AI only as a productivity measure, but actually it's the ones that are really winning are the ones that are looking at it in the context of how do we improve the employee experience with tools like these things. And in the same way, the productivity enhancement will actually improve the experience so that you're not extending your workday by 2.5 hours, but getting maybe 4 hours more work done in less time.
Let's bring that number down. Next year it should be lower than the 8 hour that everybody's expecting. Well, great. It's funny that it's so sort of it's kind of spread across board, which is also interesting to see, because usually when I've done this before, it's very heavily A and B, which it kind of, majority is, but I've seen like a bigger majority. So that's, no, Americas, you're doing better already. So that's great.
We'll take
it. What's actually happening is that the productivity is actually being squeezed from both sides. What we're seeing is investment is tightening. So compared to 2022, from 66% to 35% now HR leaders plan to increase budgets. And at the same time, what we're seeing is the percentage of burnout mentions by employees has increased dramatically. So organizations are asking for more output from people who already have less energy and resources to work with, right? And that creates, you can see where that goes. But the organizations getting ahead of this are asking a fundamentally different question. Not how do we get people to do more, but what work actually creates value, and how do we design work around that? Because there's a difference in spending hours doing low value work versus spending maybe half an hour on something that's really high value. Shopify, for example, they canceled all recurring meetings across the organization. Imagine thousands of hours freed overnight so employees could focus on work that actually moved the business forward. And another example I can think of is Asana. They introduced no meeting Wednesdays just to protect deep work time. And I think that's super important. I did that canceling the recurring meetings exercise with my team, and it really works. So I'd really recommend that. And then not necessarily well-being initiatives, right? That they just basically dictate decisions around where attention goes. And here's something worth pausing on, because I think it lands differently for HR professionals than it does for executives, if I may say. You are in a unique position. You own the processes, the templates, the rhythms, the structure of how people work. So you have more leverage on productivity than almost any other function in the organization. But only if you treat this as a design challenge and not a communications challenge. So you do have a lot of power here. Key takeaways here: things start with running a meeting audit in your own team first. Like I said, I did this. What recurring meetings are kind of useless and could be taken out to do more deep work. Also look at your one-on-one manager's template for performance conversations. Does it actually talk about workload? Does it talk about, the time, productivity, etc., or does it just jump to results? If it's the latter, you're really missing half the picture. And another thing is, in the conversation of productivity, maybe we haven't touched upon it a lot, but skills mapping really plays a role here as well, even if you're starting with an imperfect one. Because the reality is you cannot redesign work allocation without knowing where capability lives within your organization. So use your next L&D review or your team meeting or whatever it may be to identify maybe even 5 critical skills and who holds them. Imperfect is fine. Start somewhere. Anything to add here, Jake, before we go on to the last one?
Now, despite popular belief, Ammara, we too across the Americas are imperfect. So I think one of the chat stuck out with me. Focus on the human experience and productivity challenge as a design challenge versus a communication challenge. That one just really resonated. So I think you're
cool
on it.
All right. So the last bit we're going to talk about is how do we stabilize without stagnating? And you'll see what I mean by that, because it's really a stability paradox. It was quite interesting when I first read the research that came out of it. And I'm sure everyone will see what we mean here. So in uncertain times, employees obviously want stability, right? And stability keeps people in their role. Our data also shows that organizations that prioritize job security, for example, in their EVP, achieve voluntary turnover rates about 9 percentage points lower. So that sounds really good. And it is, until it isn't. Because that stability without movement creates a different problem. People stay put, they protect what they have. And they are not willing to take risks. Internal promotion rates stall. And what we're also seeing here, and you can see that on the screen, is that organizations that see highest internal promotion rates are actually the ones that emphasize reward and recognition. So what this tells us is that the goal isn't necessarily stability or movement. It's stability that creates the confidence to move within your organization. So when people trust the system around them, when the pathways are clear, are visible, recognition is fair, and development is real, not just on a piece of paper, they're more willing to learn, take risks, and grow. They stay because they can go somewhere, not because they're afraid to leave, because there's a huge difference. This is where that silent disconnect starts to happen. I was just to quickly bring in something I was reading the other day, and Jake, please do chime in. In the U.S., the quit rates in 2024 were the lowest since 2020, according to one of the reports. I'm sorry, I can't remember which one it was. So on surface, obviously it sounds like a retention win, but then there was this complicated dynamic where the internal mobility is also stagnating there. And that kind of proves this point as well, right? Like people aren't quitting, but they aren't moving even within the organization. And I think there was also something around people saying they find it easier to actually look for something outside the organization than within the organization.
Yeah.
I found that like an interesting dynamic here.
Yeah, you're seeing the trend. I mean, look, like during, it's funny. It's funny, but it's not funny because it's real. We all feel it across the Americas. We saw kind of the Great Resignation take place probably around COVID times, because you had a lot of folks with a lot of options. Money was cheap. Companies were hiring all over, and you had a lot of options at the front. Then you had this period of quiet quitting where folks were then maybe starting to hang on and say, well, things are changing. Let me just hang out, but not do too much. Then with the productivity focus, quiet quitting kind of got pushed and said, if that's happening, then organizations aren't going to like that. And so now we're at this place where you've got, like Ammara is sharing, you've got the balance of humans who want career advancement, want more opportunity, want to take on more. And then the traditional lens, what does that mean? Quote unquote, climbing the ladder, whatever that ladder might look like. It's not the case anymore, right? With AI's advent, with AI's changing how organizational structures are taking place. Like I might be managing a team of 10 and 3 of those are people and 7 of them are agents, right? It's like, that's the kind of place. And so a lot of organizations are pausing and they're seeing employees that are loyal, high performing, great employees, almost they're really taking care of that. They're hugging that job. Like job hugging is a trend we're seeing. So they're taking care of that job. They're saying, hey, I want to build and grow here, but when's the right opportunity actually to show up? 2 of the agents that I was just looking at the cohort we talked about last week, folks are now in the capstone experience. So it's an 8-week program. We're in the 7 and 8 coming up weeks, next week and the week after, where folks are saying, hey, take this embedded data you've used, now go build your own agents. 2 that came up in the ideas we were sharing last week. One was the promotion and mobility tracker. So simply just like looking at your data today and seeing across the data sets, your employee engagement data sets, your learning and development data sets, your HRS data sets, and saying, how many folks have you promoted across the organization in the last little bit? What's the communication of that been like? Where are our high potentials? We need to be, concerned. And then at the same time, another agent someone brought up was a succession and flight risk analyzer. So trying to get ahead of saying, hey, we've identified people at the organization we, definitely don't want to lose. How do we best get out in front of that? The challenge in the past has been having the data across systems or having to pay a lot of money to access it. Now, you can do it quickly, cheaply in a secure environment much quicker. So just worth considering.
No, it's interesting dynamics. And I think that's also the challenge for organizations, right? Like how do you, like those potential regretted losses or high potentials, like how do you actually make them keep moving and upskilling them, reskilling them in different ways so they stay within the organization, even with agents coming into play and everything. One example that we see is from Boehringer Ingelheim. A nice example of stability and agility, how those 2 can work together by design. It's an independent company and has been, we've worked with them for years and they plan for generations. No exaggeration, but they really plan ahead, right? Stable foundation. But leaders are also very aware that high retention can can hide some emerging potential. So they work deliberately to keep opportunity visible and movement alive. Employees are encouraged really to connect what they're doing today with where they really want to go next, through an integrated process that links development, business needs, and succession. So all in all, whether it's like cross-functional projects and short-term international experiences, all of that has really worked in their favor. And I can imagine, going back to what you're saying, Jake, soon enough, the agents equation will also play into it, and show us like a different facet of internal movement and what we can do best with it. So that's amazing to see. Sometimes I'm like, it's kind of cool to be part of this era where we're seeing all these things change quite a bit. Well, just to give a couple of key takeaways before I come to you, Jake, is pull your internal mobility data. And Jake started talking about it already. If you don't have the data, that's where you start. Because if you don't have it, then you're not going to be able to do anything about it. So you can't improve what you can't see. And this is like really funny, but it happens. And I've seen that so many times with real organizations, our clients. Is the opportunities are there internally, especially the big organizations, the multinationals, but they're buried somewhere. Employees are not even aware that they exist. So they don't apply, they don't move, they don't think about it. So all the tools exist, all the opportunities exist, but they just don't know. So now we've got to get creative with how do we make this more visible to our employees. So they're not hugging their jobs, but they're taking the opportunity to try something different that will land them in a place that the business actually needs. And as you can tell, I'm super passionate about equipping and enabling managers. It's giving them a career conversation script as well. They feel underprepared. They're not HR. They've maybe not had this conversation ever before in their life. So, give them some better career conversation scripting tools. Where do you want, or teach them how to use the ChatGPT or Claude to coach them. Or even tools that you're using internally for maybe your sales calls, for example. Those can be like some real quick wins to sort of tell your manager, like, hey, these exist, use these to have your development conversations, your career conversations with your team. Anything to add, Jake? We've got a couple of minutes.
I don't know. I think you cover, I say no, but I'm like, yeah, I do. Just being modest. Yeah. No, I think the opportunity I see for human capital leaders, and you mentioned it earlier, like we're living in one of the most transformational times in human history of how work is going to be getting done in the next 50 to 100 years. And to not recognize that you're living through this moment, and I think to not fully take advantage of the role that you play in that, meaning the human element, right? Many of us are really good at naturally focusing on the humans. What's the human experience? And so if you don't have a very strong relationship with your head of IT or your head of your CIO, chief technology officer, I would say spend the next 6 months getting to know them, understanding their pain, the pressures they're under. Take them for a dinner or a lunch, like make them feel the love as the human they are, and bring your ideas, but also bring the attitude and intention of skill building around agentic AI, because CIOs and CTOs right now, they're swimming in it. They're dealing with risk. They're dealing with how it impacts people, but also the organization. They're dealing with confidential data. And if you can show up as a partner there to them as a human, but also to them as a kind of helping guide them along the way on what these ethics and governance policies should be from a human standpoint, they'll love you. I guarantee it. And your organization will end up better off in the next 12 to 24 months in the immediate term, because taking that human lens allows you, and being intentional allows you to have long-term flexibility. But running too fast after the next fad or the hot thing that looks really good, those are the things that can get us in trouble and introduce risk that we didn't expect. So Anyway, that's kind of my thought closing out, Ammara. I'm going to drop, there's a potential we'll do more of these AI-powered HR leader cohorts in the future. If you think we should do more, I'm going to drop it in the chat, the link. Feel free to just register to join future wait lists, because we're kind of like, do we do more of these, or will it be redundant? We'll send it out via email after the chat just closed. So anyway, that's it.
Awesome. Love it, Jake. Thank you so much. And for everybody, here's a wrap up of the 5 trends that we've spoken about. What we have also done is you'll get this PowerPoint and the recording with the feedback survey in the email you'll receive as a follow-up. We've also done like very simple, like 5 things you can do in 5 weeks. Just picked up one action from the key takeaways we've spoken about, just to help you get started. And you'll see now on the screen sort of like a pop-up where you can download our full World of Work Trends report. It gives more details into what we spoke about today. And after that, there'll be another pop-up with the feedback survey. We'd love to hear from you, what you found useful, what you didn't. Just helps us do this better next time. And hopefully we'll see you all back the next one that Jake and I are part of.
Thanks, team.
Thanks, everybody, and have a lovely rest of the day. And we're hoping to see you again.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.